Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Life, Liberty, and Levin Sunday. Thanks for being here. We have two great guests. America's wise man, I call him, Victor Davis Hanson, and Rebecca Heinrichs, who's an expert on Russia. I think we need to dig into Russia a little bit. But before we do, it was really an honor for me, my wife, and some family members to attend CPAC and not just participate, but to watch Donald Trump speak. He is a fantastic speaker. The substance, the entertainment, the jokes, the sharp edges. And I came home last night and I was thinking about what he said. And what I do is I write and I think about these things. So I wrote something and I want to share it with you. I think it's important. Listen to it beginning to end and then you'll understand why I wrote it. American Marxism, that's a book I wrote obviously, but American Marxism, dressed up as some kind of progressive or modern ideology, was not a product of the American experiment. It is a rejection of it. It is a rejection of Judeo-Christian values and principles, a rejection of John Locke and Montesquieu, the most important philosophers to inform the founders and the framers. It is a rejection of the Declaration of Independence, which was and is the most concise statement of America's birth and purpose, and a rejection of the American Constitution, which established a Republican government, not a centralized state nor a democracy, both of which are preludes to tyranny. And the framers understood that. The ideology of which I speak, self-characterized as progressivism and therefore camouflaged as human progress and advancement, is dark, inhumane, and regressive in every respect. And that's the modern Democrat Party, their media and academia. At its core, it is the fanatical belief that there really is no individuality. There's no individuality. In fact, for an individual to become fully realized, he must surrender himself to the greater good, as defined by a relative few of masterminds. Indeed, the individual can only truly be free and fulfilled by serving the collective, and through this collective, the so-called greater good, the so-called best interests of the larger community, etc. In other words, as an indivisible and invisible, minuscule part of a bigger, indeed immense, centralized design. Now, for us nerds, that's Rousseau, that's Hegel, that's Marx, that's Woodrow Wilson, and today, virtually every political science department in America's colleges and universities. That's how they view the world, for starters. So this requires the abandonment of so-called eternal truths. The notion of natural law and God-given unalienable rights as set forth in our Declaration of Independence. The abandonment of knowledge and science. There are not, for example, two and only two biological sexes. In fact, it requires the abandonment of God, of human experience and history, existing social bonds, including parents to children, values and customs and traditions handed down from one generation to the next that keeps the civil society glued together. We must be cut off from the past. The past must be condemned and denigrated. Even language must change. Re-education through primary schools to the media and the public square to reinforce this new way. The re-engineering of society and the culture and the individual and humanity itself in support of this march toward this centralized political and governing utopia, the details and particulars of which are intangible and the achievement of which is impossible. It requires groupthink, thought control, which in turn requires the condemning, the ridiculing, the ostracizing, even outlawing at times, reasoning, logic, debate, contrary views, academic freedom, freedom of speech, and a true free press. The institutions of the civilized society, born from the Enlightenment, must not only be questioned, but ultimately bulldozed. Not all at once, but gradually, because they don't want you to notice. And then more aggressively, when they think it doesn't matter if you notice. Of course, and obviously, this means that our Constitution, which has built-in barriers and firewalls, checks and balances, separation of powers within the national government and between and among the national government and state and local governments, must be eradicated. This is precisely why the so-called early progressive intellectuals in the late 1800s and early 1900s, including Woodrow Wilson, who would be a Democrat president later, relentlessly and furiously attacked both the Declaration and the Constitution, especially separation of powers and federalism. He talked about the need for a living and breathing Constitution and compared it to the human body. How, he asked, can a person live if his organs are constantly working against each other rather than harmony? Wilson and his ilk argued that we are not bound by the decisions and doctrines of the past, that we need not adhere to them, any more than the authors of the Constitution were bound by those who preceded them. We are free to do as we wish, just as they were, he said. We need not worship them. We need not worship their words in the Declaration and the Constitution. Wilson was arguing for a sinister revolution in which the instrumentalities of the federal government would be turned into the tools of this so-called new progressivism, which, again, was a form of European totalitarianism, which I have termed American Marxism. And Wilson, again, speaking for many other scholars and intellectuals at the time, ultimately argued that the best way to pull this off was through a ubiquitous, centralized bureaucracy populated with like-minded experts, which would be detached from the elections and the popular will in order to impose with scientific and mechanical certainty a new society on the masses, unencumbered by the past, indeed a complete break from the past. And he argued the most certain way to accomplish this would be through the judiciary, with a careful selection and appointment of ideological comrades who serve for life would drive this revolution and give it a legal pretext, a legal justification, and authority. This is why we have a massive federal government with hundreds of federal departments and agencies, multi-millions of federal bureaucrats, trillions and trillions in debt, millions of miles in red tape, tens of thousands of regulations, and so forth. You didn't vote for any of this. In fact, your so-called representative government in Congress, they don't have any idea what's going on. And then they take this entity and they place it in the executive branch. The most powerful legislative body is not Congress. It's not in the legislative branch. It's in the executive branch. And I'll tell you where it's not. It's not in the Constitution. It's not in the Constitution. This is what has happened. This is also why faith and family, including parental control, are under constant attack. This is why free speech, a true free press, and real learning and academic freedom are smothered by indoctrination and propaganda, and essentially in our public schools run by two unions and two union bosses answerable to the Democrat Party. This is why our societal norms, traditions, and customs, actual knowledge, actual science, are being systematically suppressed and demonized, constantly under attack. We must break. We must break from what is. We must break from our history. We must break from our families, from our faith, in order to focus on, rely on, and have desperate need for this massive, centralized government and the masterminds who run it. So importantly, this is why the American Marxists, or the self-described progressives, that run the Democrat Party, that run corporate media, that run our colleges and universities, that run the government unions and populate so much of the judiciary, do not care how much fraud, waste, and abuse exists in the federal government, and reject efforts to manage, reduce, and limit the power of this massive bureaucracy and its army of bureaucrats ruling over our lives, we as individual Americans. They could care less. They seek to protect it. They seek to secure it. This is why these judges are using their positions, the law, and even the Constitution in such perverse and diabolical ways to undo the results of the November election, your landslide election, and indeed sabotage President Trump, Elon Musk, and those who are fighting to preserve this country, to recalibrate the balance of power and separation of powers, crucial to our liberty and civil society, and breathe life back into our Constitution and our republic. And as a side note, George Washington had a man serving at his side who was foreign born. In fact, he was French. His name was Lafayette. And at least for now, Donald Trump has a man at his side who was foreign born, who's done great things for the country at the direction of Donald Trump. He's called Elon Musk. Now, like autocrats and Marxists abroad, the Democrat Party and its press are and will fight to the bitter end to preserve what they have created over the decades. They have created this monstrosity. They have and will fearmonger and are. Scaremonger. They will deceive. They will distort. They have and will wave around and cite the very Constitution that they abhor and have worked so hard to dismantle. They will use propaganda and their media platforms, not a real free press, propagandists for them, to accuse those who are honoring, following, and reviving the Constitution, namely President Trump and his administration. They will accuse them of destroying the Constitution and causing, you've heard it, a constitutional crisis. This is what autocratic regimes do, fascist and Marxist. They project onto their opponents who they are, and what they believe. Now, the problem for these people is that they've spent years and years lecturing you and me about the evils of America, about the evils of America's founding, about the evils of the Constitution. That's right, written by slaveholders, that it's too old, that it's too white. The evils of our society, the evils of our economic system, the evils of the so-called selfish individual, the overly successful, meaning the wealthy, the racism inherent in merit, and of course, unfixable racism and sexism built into America's DNA. You've heard it all. They have spent years tearing down our country, tearing down our history, tearing down our founders, tearing down we the people. And now they expect us to forget. We don't forget. President Trump will go down in history as a truly great president because he's the first president to take on this sinister counter-revolution that seeks nothing less than to destroy your way of life, to destroy our system of government, to destroy our civil society, to destroy this great nation, and turn it into another failed European-style quasi-Marxist centralized government that lords over us and abuses us. That's the battle that's taking place. It is historic, and it will determine whether we live in freedom or in tyranny, because that's what the Democrat Party, that's what their press, that's what their professors, that's what they stand for. Tyranny. They wish to remake you. They wish to remake this society. They have changed our government. They're undermining our Constitution. That's the modern Democrat Party today. Bernie Sanders, a Marxist. Jamie Raskin, a Marxist. Look at AOC. Look at Tlaib. Look at Omar. Hakeem Jeffries. Research them. Check out who these people are. These aren't people who support the United States of America. These are people who are constantly, endlessly trashing us, ripping us down, while they wave the Constitution, while they talk about the individual, whether they talk about equality and liberty and all the rest. They hate us. Donald Trump loves this country. He's put his life on the line for this country. He's put everything aside to fight for this country. This is a unique time in history. And either we back him to help us survive as a free people, or we're going to lose this country. It's that simple. And I would encourage some of these never-Trumpers, some of whom have been in the conservative movement, not all, some of whom have worked in past Republican administrations, not all. Don't you think it's time to wake the hell up? Don't you think it's time to understand what's going on in this country? Don't you think it's time to help us and help this administration bring life back into our Constitution? If you don't, you're no better than the rest.